Welcome, my dear students, to another week of biology with Mr. Miguel. This week, we will be talking about photosynthesis. More specifically, factors that limit the rate of photosynthesis. So before we start, let us review a little bit about photosynthesis. What is photosynthesis? In a nutshell, photosynthesis is the process in which organisms use sunlight in order to create glucose. That's basically what photosynthesis is. And notice that I put the word organisms or organism. And what types of organisms are able to photosynthesize? Well, we have plants, as you should be able to see there. Plants. We have algae, which are usually found at sea, and we also have cyanobacteria. They're a type of bacteria. So these are the organisms that can normally photosynthesize. Now let us look at the objectives for this week. The objectives for the week are the following. So let us start with objective number 1. Let's look at the relevance of photosynthesis, limiting factors, and the source. So while watching the news, I came across this article that reads, Blue Creek farmers lose millions in corn crops due to drought. It means it was dry. So in the north of Belize, there's a little town called Blue Creek. And Blue Creek, they depend a lot on agriculture. And they lost millions of dollars because this year was too dry. And how exactly those drought, the lack of water actually affect or limit photosynthesis in our plants. We will be looking at that later on in the presentation, but this is just a little preview of how it is relevant to us. Objective number 2 looks at limiting factors. What is a limiting factor? It is very important for us to understand limiting factors. Why? Because these factors are things that actually stop or slow down reactions that are occurring. But let me give you an example of how this works. I want you to imagine that you work at Burger King or McDonald's, and you are required to make certain burgers of certain styles. In this case, we have the Mega Miguel Special Burger, and this burger has bread, it has lettuce, it has cheese, it has beef, and tomato. So it has 5 components. Those are 5 factors. Forget about photosynthesis for a minute. As a worker, you're expected to make burgers every single day. So let us look at the following slide. Let us say that you are required to make complete burgers. Look at the slide. How many whole burgers are you able to produce using the materials here? So I have 5 pieces of bread. I think that we are able to make 3 whole burgers. Let us look at this next picture. How many whole burgers can you make using the following? I think you're able to 2. I think you're getting the hang of this. So in this slide, how many burgers are you able to make? You're able to make 2. So the main point of that activity is to compare photosynthesis and show that photosynthesis is actually similar to making burgers. And every single scenario that you found in the past slides, you notice that you lack at least something. And that something that you're lacking, that is known as the limiting factor. So something that is lacking or can cause you to slow down in the production of whatever you're producing, that is known as the limiting factor. The same way it works with photosynthesis. We have various components and you just have to look at the equation and you should be able to identify the components that are necessary for photosynthesis. So what are the components necessary for photosynthesis? Those components that are fundamental. Well, we have carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide is right here. See? I circled it right there. This carbon dioxide is used in photosynthesis. If there is no carbon dioxide, can photosynthesis really occur? No. Also, we have another limiting factor, and that is water. Water is also part of the equation, and it's also important, fundamental in photosynthesis. Without light, photosynthesis cannot occur. And then we also have an extra one, which we will cover in the next slide. So what are the limiting factors of photosynthesis? What are possible things that can make it just stop or slow down? Well, we have 4 examples of things that can slow down photosynthesis. We have light, we have carbon dioxide, water, and temperature. And we will be looking at each and every one of these. This brings us to objective number 4, which is to explain how light actually affects the rate of photosynthesis. So what are you able to see from this setup? The first thing that I need you to look at is that there is a plant. The plant's name is the pondweed, and pondweed is able to grow underwater. That's why it is used in this experiment. What else are you able to see from this experiment? You see there is a test tube. Also, you have to observe that because photosynthesis is happening, little bubbles are actually going towards the top. So bubbles are being produced. What do the bubbles contain? The bubbles contain oxygen. And the oxygen is accumulating inside of this test tube. And that's why the setup is like this. What else can we observe from this setup? We're also able to observe a ruler, of course, which is at a certain distance from the plant. We are also able to see a lamp. And the lamp itself is the light source. And this light source is providing, obviously, the light to the plant in order for the plant to photosynthesize. Now here is the sweet thing. The farther we would move this lamp from the plant, what do you think happens to the oxygen bubbles being produced by the plant? Do they get higher or do they get lower? That's the question. So what can we see in this slide? In this slide, we can see a graph that is very, very important for you to understand. It shows light intensity, and you see that as light intensity increases, what happens to the... Remember that volume is measured in the little bubbles that is being produced by the plant. Those bubbles contain oxygen. So what happens as we increase the light intensity? It increases also. We see from the graph that as light is increased, the rate of photosynthesis is increased. But does it increase forever and ever? No. There is a certain level of light intensity that a plant can tolerate. This means that once you put or add more light to it, it will not photosynthesize more. It will retain the same level of photosynthesis. So that's what you're able to see from the graph. What is the relationship? It's a positive relationship. What does this tell us about the limiting factors? It tells us that if you remove light, or if light is less intense, therefore you will have less rate of photosynthesis from the plant. Let us move into objective number 5, which is to explain how water affects the rate of photosynthesis. One of the things that we need to keep in our minds is that we as students build on the knowledge that we know. Yes, we know for a fact that water is needed for the plant. The plant needs water. We know that from the time we were children. But why exactly does the plant need the water? Well, now that we know a little bit more about how photosynthesis actually works, let me review a little bit on photosynthesis. Photosynthesis happens in 2 stages. These 2 stages are known as the light dependent or the light reaction and the dark reaction. In the light reaction, light is needed to break down the water. So the water is broken down by sunlight in the light reaction, and a little bit of energy is produced. And in the dark reaction, something else happens. We will talk about that later. So from here, you're able to see I have it on a magnifying glass. Why does the plant need water? Why exactly does it need water? Well, one thing you need to keep in mind is that water is needed in order to separate the oxygen from the hydrogen. So we know that water looks like this. Why is water needed? Because we need the hydrogen. We need the hydrogen. What is the hydrogen needed for? The hydrogen is needed in order to build a glucose molecule. And this is how a glucose molecule would look like. Please take note of that. So yes, the plant needs water. We know that the plant needs water, but exactly why? To grow. Yes, but why? Because in the light-dependent reaction, water is broken down, oxygen and hydrogen are liberated, and the hydrogen that is liberated is used to build a glucose molecule. That is why water is needed in photosynthesis. Referring back to my article at the beginning of this presentation, you notice that millions of dollars were lost from just the absence of water. Why? Because the less water we have, the less the photosynthesis. The less the photosynthesis, the less food is produced, and the less food is produced, the more financial losses we have to endure. And that is why it is relevant to know about photosynthesis and how water actually impacts photosynthesis. Our next objective looks at how does temperature affect the rate of photosynthesis, where there are a few things that we will cover before that. From this slide, we're able to see enzymes. But what are enzymes? Let me play the video for you.
Enzymes are proteins that speed up chemical reactions in the cell. A special region on the enzyme, called the active site, has a shape that fits with specific substrate molecules. An enzyme works by binding to one or more specific molecules called reactants or substrates. Binding occurs at the active site. The enzyme and substrates form an enzyme-substrate complex. The interactions between the substrates and the enzyme stresses or weakens some of the chemical bonds in the substrates. These stresses encourage a link between the two substrates, leading to the formation of a different molecule. As a result of the chemical interactions within the active site, a new product is formed. The product is released from the active site. The enzyme assumes its original shape and is free to work again. Although this reaction has specifically illustrated the formation of a single product from two substrate molecules, other enzymes catalyze the formation of two products from a single substrate.
So what can we learn from this video? From this video, we can learn that enzymes are little proteins that carry out reactions in the body. They're necessary and fundamental in orchestrating and organizing and carrying out and executing chemical reactions. Not only in humans, but in plants, it is needed to carry out photosynthesis. But that doesn't answer the entire thing. So next we will talk a little bit about proteins. And you might be wondering, why is he changing the subject? And as you can see from the video, there is this protein in egg, easiest example, and look at the liquid. It looks like a cleary, viscous liquid. That is a protein. Okay, the man puts it on the frying pan. What is happening to the protein? Is it still clear? No, it turns white. Why should we care about this? It's because proteins, when exposed to temperature, like the one on the video, when exposed to the temperature, to high temperatures, they get denatured. That means that they no longer work. The active site gets denatured. Therefore, they cannot orchestrate or organize or execute chemical reactions. The same thing in plants, as you will see here. So in plants, we know that photosynthesis is orchestrated by enzymes, and enzymes, they enhance the chemical reaction. That means that the more enzymes there are, the faster the reaction. And we also know that enzymes are very sensitive to temperature. Why? Because they're proteins. Now, once you heat up a protein, it gets disfigured. It's like, you see my face here? Okay, imagine me getting burnt. My entire face getting burnt. Will I still look like Miguel Bonilla? No, right? There are certain things that will become unrecognizable about me. Same thing with enzymes. After a certain temperature is exceeded, then it gets denatured, and if it gets denatured, then that means that it can no longer work, and if it can no longer work, the plant cannot photosynthesize. If there is no photosynthesis, there is no food, and if there is no food, humans lose millions of dollars. And there is an important graph I need you to look at. It's in the next slide. In this graph, you're able to see something extremely important. That as temperature increases, we see that yes, the rate of photosynthesis increases, but once the temperature gets too hot, what happens to the rate of photosynthesis? It starts to decrease. Why does it start to decrease? That's because the enzymes have been denatured and they can no longer function properly. And if they can no longer function properly, photosynthesis, specifically the rate of photosynthesis, decreases. But I notice that at lower temperatures, the enzymes are unable to work properly. Yes, that is correct. That is because the less energy there is, the lower the temperature, the slower particles move. That's why. It's like the particulate theory of matter. Once you increase the temperature, the particles move faster. And the faster they move, the more collisions there is, the more they meet up. But all you need to know is that at certain temperature, known as optimum temperature, enzymes are able to work the best. And that is how temperature impacts photosynthesis. Let us move into our final objective for this session. Our final objective speaks about the concentration of carbon dioxide and its effect on photosynthesis. From the diagram here, you're able to see the dark reaction on the dark box right there. And in the dark reaction, you're able to observe that carbon dioxide is actually utilized in the dark reaction in order to finally merge it with the hydrogen that we get from the light reaction in order to produce glucose. So let us look at it. So we have carbon dioxide, which looks something like this. Carbon is used in the construction of the glucose, and that is why carbon dioxide is fundamental, and it can be considered a limiting factor that limits the rate of photosynthesis. If there is no carbon dioxide, photosynthesis decreases, and let me show you the graph for that. Here you're able to see the graph on how carbon dioxide actually limits the rate of photosynthesis. We are able to see that the lower the carbon dioxide concentration, the lower the rate of photosynthesis. And if we increase the carbon dioxide, what happens to the rate of photosynthesis? It also increases, and it is very important to take note of this very fundamental aspect. And in your experiment that you need to conduct on your own, you will notice that as you add carbonate and dissolve carbon dioxide into the water, the amount of bubbles being produced by the leaf actually increases dramatically. So in one area of your experiment, you will have a leaf in normal water. And on the next side, you will have your leaf submerged in water that contains a higher concentration of carbon dioxide. You will notice that the leaf inside of the carbonate water will produce bubbles much faster. Why? Because the rate of photosynthesis increases as the carbon dioxide availability and concentration increases. So that's it for our presentation today. Thank you very much for your keen attention. Have a blessed rest of the week.